The silence. It was the deep and terrifying loneliness that existed before the first syllable was whispered into the void. For millennia, the human spirit was an echo chamber, its grandest ideas trapped within the fragile bone cage of the skull. Imagine the anguish. To see the sun rise, to feel the terror of the predator's shadow, to understand the intricate turning of the cosmos, yet lack the vital apparatus, a complex system or structure designed for a particular use, to share, to preserve, to build. Then, like a ripple from a cosmic stone dropped into the primordial soup of consciousness, came the word. It was not merely a sound, it was a revolution. It was a bridge spanning the abyss between I and you. The history of humanity is not etched in stone. It is composed in the very lexicon we share, a monumental, ongoing script. This is the story of how language didn't just record history, it created us. The earliest whispers of civilization were found not in grand temples, but in the cuneiform script of ancient Sumer, a revolutionary system designed not for poetry, but for accounting, for tracking barley and livestock. This mundane, intensely practical necessity marked the beginning of true, long-term memory outside the biological constraints of a single lifespan. Imagine the Sumerian scribe, eyes squinting in the harsh Mesopotamian sun, carving wedges into soft clay. He wasn't merely listing assets, he was performing an act of epistemological defiance, a philosophical term for resisting limitations on knowledge. He was saying, I refuse to let this fact vanish with my breath. This practical function soon gave way to the profound. Centuries later, in the sprawling, dust-motes dancing halls of the Library of Alexandria, lived Elara, a dedicated scholar whose life was an exercise in philology, the study of historical linguistic change. Her current obsession was an incomplete fragment of an Aramaic text, a philosophical treatise from a desert sage. Elara was not just translating words, she was battling for the soul of the deceased author. She felt the heavy gravitas, seriousness, and importance of her duty to render the precise shade of meaning, to capture the pathos, a quality that evokes pity or sadness, of the original thinker. She knew that a single misplaced preposition, a mistranslated idiom like to wash one's hands of, to disclaim responsibility for something, could fundamentally alter the entire philosophical thrust of the work, inadvertently severing a connection to universal wisdom that had endured for 1,000 years. Her struggle illustrates a core truth for every English learner. Translation is never a sterile transfer of information. It is an act of creation, a moment of deep, emotional identification with another mind across the chasm, a deep, wide gap or difference of time and culture. The psychological impact of literacy cannot be overstated. Before writing, knowledge was fluid, oral, and constantly subject to the whims of the teller and the inevitable erosion of memory. Once committed to a permanent form, knowledge became sacrosanct, regarded as too important or valuable to be interfered with. This transition did more than just preserve facts, it fundamentally changed how the human brain processes information. The written word encourages linear thought, logical sequencing, and analytical critique, giving rise to the formal discipline of rhetoric, the art of effective or persuasive speaking or writing. The very structure of the English sentence, with its mandatory subject-verb-object organization, trains the mind to organize reality into clear, actionable components. Historical examples abound. Consider the influence of the printing press, invented by Johannes Gutenberg in the 15th century. Before the printing press, books were luxuries, hand-copied by scribes, often riddled with errors, rendering knowledge esoteric, intended for or likely to be understood by only a small number of people with a specialized knowledge or interest. Gutenberg's innovation was the ultimate democratizing force, a technological catalyst, an agent that precipitates or accelerates a change or result that allowed for the mass reproduction of texts like the Bible, laying the foundation for the Protestant Reformation, which was, at its heart, a massive linguistic movement demanding that the common person have direct, unmediated access to the source text. For the modern English learner, this history is critically relevant. Every time you open a textbook or read an online article, you are benefiting from a 500-year-old revolution that insisted on the accessibility of knowledge. The challenge is no longer access, but discernment, the ability to sift, examine something thoroughly to isolate what is useful or important through the endless stream of information, a skill that requires precise and nuanced understanding of English structure and vocabulary. Advanced learners must strive not just for correct grammar, but for a deep appreciation of denotation, the literal or primary meaning of a word, and connotation, an idea or feeling that a word invokes in addition to its literal meaning. Understanding that words carry the heavy, often unseen, weight of centuries of use, opinion, and association. Elara, in her quiet corner, grappling with her text, was experiencing this emotional development, the sudden, heart-stopping realization that she was a custodian, a person who has responsibility for or looks after something of history, not just a reader. Her frustration turned to reverence. Her simple task of translation became a sacred duty. The universal wisdom embedded here is that true learning is an act of humility, a recognition that the language we speak and the English we strive to master is a gift, an invaluable, extremely useful, indispensable tool crafted by countless generations. If the architecture of our thoughts is entirely dependent on the vocabulary we possess, are we truly free thinkers until we have mastered the tools of expression that allow for genuine intellectual complexity? The subsequent journey of language entered a phase of intense linguistic strife, conflict, or struggle that followed the Norman Conquest, a period that serves as a profound mirror for anyone navigating the nuances between registers in English. 11th century London was a city fractured by language. The nobility spoke French, the church utilized Latin, and the common people conversed in an Anglo-Saxon vernacular, the native language or dialect spoken by ordinary people in a particular country or region that was slowly receding into obscurity. Imagine Thomas, a poor but ambitious scribe working at St. Paul's Cathedral during this volatile time. Thomas felt the immense emotional pressure of living in two linguistic worlds. He was pulled by the prestige and power of Latin, where he learned words like magnificence and destiny, carrying deep spiritual and philosophical weight. But his home and market language was the one that expressed basic human truths like sweat, hunger, and love. The advanced English student experiences this clash daily when confronting parallel vocabulary for a single concept: ask versus interrogate, or start versus commence. The former holds Germanic roots, conveying intimacy and the everyday. The latter derives from Latin or French, sounding more formal and distant. This linguistic duality gives English its extraordinary expressive capacity, the ability to articulate the same idea at the precise emotional register required. This linguistic duality forged Thomas's soul, teaching him that true strength lay not in rejecting one language, but in synthesizing both. This principle leads to the study of etymology, the origin and historical development of a word, where the learner discovers that the choice of a word carries a whole historical premise, a previous statement or proposition from which another is inferred or follows as a conclusion. Furthermore, this historical reality is inextricably linked to linguistic imperialism, a dominant culture asserting its language over others, where the victor's tongue becomes the language of law and commerce. Thomas, however, came to view Latin not as a master, but as a key to a vast knowledge system, a door he opened through sheer effort. His emotional development peaked when he first translated a common peasant's grievance into a Latin legal document, managing to retain the essential vigor of the common tongue while incorporating the precision of the legal form. He utilized the word as a bridge, enacting the idiom, to keep abreast of, to stay informed about, or to keep up with, meaning to walk with two currents simultaneously. The modern relevance is immense in our technological world. We must fluidly switch between the quick, clipped language of social media and the complex, considered language of lengthy, critical essays. Mastery of one language enhances our inner power, teaching us that the greatest strength in personal expression lies in owning both linguistic worlds, the language of the street and the language of the boardroom. Given that these dual roots exist in our linguistic heritage, does this uniquely equip us to view the world through more nuanced, layered perspectives? The next era was defined by a philosophical urge to tame language, a desire to slow down the relentless pace of expression and fix meaning into a permanent, unmoving form. This was the 18th century Enlightenment, a period that rejected chaos and elevated reason above all. In this age, everything had to be placed into a logical order, and the English language, wild, unstandardized, and rife with regional variations, was considered a national embarrassment. Here rose the figure of Samuel Johnson, whose monumental work, A Dictionary of the English Language, was not merely a collection of definitions, but an attempt to confer legal authority upon words. The driving emotional force behind Johnson's lexicography, the compiling or writing of dictionaries, was profound. Without a shared, stable meaning for words, how could one agree upon truth or engage in democratic debate? Johnson's aim was to give people a grand weapon against the ravages of common sense. Imagine Elias, a young apprentice in a London printing press, who helped set the type for the first edition of Johnson's dictionary. Elias was a man of limited formal education. His speech was filled with local dialects that the elite deemed barbaric. When he read Johnson's definitions, he felt a deep emotional sensation, validation. Suddenly, the ordinary words from his mouth were acknowledged and precisely defined by a great book. He realized the dictionary was a tool that taught him not only how the learned spoke, but also empowered him to demand accuracy in his own daily life using their language. For him, this was the essence of the idiom, to turn over a new leaf, to make a fresh start, to behave in a better way, a pledge to a new beginning. Johnson's work was ultimately unsuccessful in fixing the language, as English remains stubbornly fluid. Yet, it established the intellectual bedrock upon which all modern educational systems stand. The philosophical lesson for the English learner is that rules are not merely restrictive. They are the railroad tracks that allow the train of expression to travel faster and more effectively. While avoiding pedantry, excessive concern with minor details and rules, the desire for accuracy increases our self-confidence and ensures our message is received exactly as intended. This is the emotional development a student feels upon mastering a difficult grammatical rule. It is a celebration of the power of their own mind to make the world clearer and more comprehensible. The modern relevance is seen in our online style guides and digital dictionaries. We still crave clarity, a shared standard that ensures our global communications don't dissolve into noise. If the natural state of language is ambiguity and change, is our demand for precision merely a useful illusion that makes human understanding possible? Moving forward, the story of English ceased to be the tale of one nation and became a vast saga of diaspora and diversity. As the British Empire expanded across the globe, it carried its language with it, a tool of trade, law, and governance. But once the language landed on foreign soil, it began a wondrous process. It localized itself. Enter the post-colonial character, Udia, a Nigerian woman caught between her mother tongue, Igbo, and the English of her school. Udia soon realized that English was not a neutral container. It was filled with historical baggage and cultural assumptions. Her emotional development reached its peak when she decided to write a novel, determining that she would not write in British English, but in Nigerian English, a language steeped in West African rhythm, idioms, and sensibilities. She transformed English from a weapon of subjugation into a vehicle for her own creative agency. This process of linguistic syncretism, the blending of different languages or cultures, is the history of how Pidgins and Creoles were born languages that arose from the necessity of cultural fusion. Udia understood that mastering English was not about faultless imitation of its rules, but about bending and shaping it to articulate her own internal truth. The idiom, a tough nut to crack, a difficult problem or situation, perfectly describes Udia's journey. The foreignness of English was a barrier, but that very obstacle forced her to develop a unique perspective and voice. The modern relevance is that today, non-native speakers of global English outnumber native speakers. As the language of the internet, global business, and international pop culture, English no longer belongs to any single nation. The universal wisdom here is that the power of a language rests not on its purity, but on its adaptability and inclusivity. With every new idiom, every new pronunciation, and every new regional usage, we are building a richer, more robust linguistic scaffolding that gives everyone on the planet a space to speak. For the learner, this means abandoning fear. Speaking English is not an attempt at perfection, but an attempt at connection. When a language spreads globally and harmonizes with local cultures, does the concept of correct English become a meaningless and restrictive philosophical idea? We arrive at the conclusion of our story in the present-day digital lexicon, where language formation has accelerated beyond historical precedent. In an instant, a viral meme, a hashtag. This is the era where meaning faces constant compression, where neologisms, a newly coined word or expression, are born in a second. In this environment, imagine Zaid, a young student who is simultaneously active in 5 chat groups, maintains a blog, and attempts to read classic literature. Zaid's emotional struggle is balancing the expectation of speed and instant communication with the need for slow, deep, reflective thought. He is learning that the cost of brevity, conciseness, shortness of duration, can be the sacrifice of detail. When we rely solely on acronyms and short-form text, do we lose the critical thinking muscle that handles the complexity of sentence structure? For Zaid, the universal wisdom is realizing that while human attention spans may have shrunk, the power of English endures. It still benefits those most who can read between the lines to infer a meaning that is not explicitly stated, who focus not just on the words written, but on their depth. The modern relevance demands that we restore intentionality to our language use. Artificial intelligence can now perform many linguistic tasks, but it cannot yet grasp the human creativity and emotional nuance that only a person can infuse into language. The final philosophy of English mastery is that it is not merely words, it is a tool of empathy. Language allows you to fully and accurately reconstruct another person's reality within your own mind. Thus, from ancient Sumer to today's Twitter, the goal has remained the same: to overcome loneliness. The person who masters English does not just own a global language, they own a window into the human experience, where they can connect historical consciousness with a modern voice. This is a call to use our language not to create noise, but to create meaningful, lasting understanding.